Now, I have the really great pleasure to begin the introduction of this terrific piece that will end today. There are two important speakers who will be with us now. I will introduce the first, and since nobody sets up an interview better than Charlie Rose, wisdom tells me that I will not introduce the second, which is Eric Schmidt. Charlie Rose, born in North Carolina, did his undergraduate and his law degree at Duke. He left a banking career to join public television as part of the Bill Moyers Journal team. He then did a little bit of work with commercial television and found himself back in the arms of public television. And in 1991 began locally a local program called The Charlie Rose Show. Well, as you all know, within 2 years, that show went nationally. It is recognized as the standard of late-night TV, and clearly is the most, if not only, but most intelligent conversation on television. Very, very few people of consequence have not sat across at that table from Charlie Rose, whether they are in the arts, in sports, in entertainment, politics, you name it. If they are of consequence, one day they need to be sitting at that table opposite Charlie Rose. Tonight, we will get to sit in on a classic Charlie Rose conversation. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in giving a warm welcome to Emmy Award winner Charlie Rose.
He is a friend of mine. He is a remarkable executive talent. We will say a little bit of this. 1995, a couple of graduate students at Stanford University thought up this idea for search. About 2001, they decided we need a partner. We need an executive. We need somebody that can help us organize. Eric is the first to tell you they didn't really need me, but he came in, and it has been an explosive growth since then. They're into everything, which we will talk about. But Eric also has, along with Sergey and along with Larry, put together one of the most exciting companies in the world. And they continue to be that. They continue to grow. I mean, when your name of your company becomes a verb, you know that you're doing something right. He is a pilot. Last night, he flew his own jet into New York. He is a man of enormous curiosity about everything. And he is one of the people who is shaping our future, our economic future, because he is one of the people on the advisory council to President Obama. But also, he is helping shape technology, which has fueled the American economy over the last 10 years. He's a remarkable man. Last Friday, we sat and had lunch. I have one suggestion for you. If you are in Silicon Valley, and if you're near Mountain View, I won't say call Eric, but you ought to see this place. It's a campus. And they have the most interesting offices you've ever seen. There are people walking around with computers all the time. They're having conferences, and they're thinking about the future. And he is one of those people who is shaping the future. Please welcome Eric Schmidt.
That was perfect. Thank you very much. Too nice.
First of all, I want to have Eric say a bit about this briefly before we start the television show. I really am thrilled to be here because, next week on our show, we are doing, on Monday, the Secretary of Energy, who's a Nobel laureate. This is from Washington. On Tuesday, the Secretary of the Treasury, Tim Geithner, on the economy. On Wednesday, the Secretary of Education. On Thursday, the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs. On Friday, Nancy Pelosi. That's our lineup for next week. I've got that Neil working really hard to book this show. But I mention that because of education and because of the commitment you have and because of what this is about, a celebration of teaching and learning. I simply can say it has defined my life, not the teaching part, although we hope that it has something to that, teaching with fun in terms of what we do every night, but the idea of learning. No, I have to adjust my tie, they're telling me too. What's wrong with my tie? Is anything wrong with my tie?
Let's have a vote.
Oh, all right. It's what? Does that look better? Is that better? Is that all right? There you go. Just for a moment, I mean, your own sense of, before we go into this, your own involvement, commitment, Google, and education.
Well, you know, I'm the product of the American public school system. And when you look back at the success one has in life, you try to remember what got you there, and a lot of things. But I'll tell you, the teachers and the commitment that I had, that I learned about education and learning, really did make the difference. So partly I'm here to say thank you. And not for myself, but rather for the people that you are educating now, who 30 years from now will say that you all made that difference. And as a person who believes in education, it's obvious that the people who are in education, and both at the K through 12 area as well as the universities, have not gotten both the credit, the attention, the funding, and really the sort of understanding of the role that they play. So we have an opportunity now, in crisis, to understand what's really important in life. And I would argue that an educated population is the only thing that's important.
Okay, so if they will tell me that the technical stuff is working, we'll try to make the human stuff work here too. So are we set to go? Welcome to the broadcast. We're in New York with the CEO of Google, Eric Schmidt. Very good. I'll come back. See, you're piercing behind the veil to see what we do. All right, back to me. Eric Schmidt for the hour. Next. You have to be really smart to do this, I'm telling you. All right. Okay. Right. Eric Schmidt, the CEO of Google, joins us now for a conversation about Google, about technology, about the future, and about education. I am pleased to have him here on the stage as we celebrate learning and teaching. Welcome.
Thank you, Charlie. Thanks for having me on again.
All right. We were just with each other last Friday on the Google campus having a conversation about some of the things we'll talk about, but not all. Let's just go back and do a quick history of Google. 1995, Sergey and Larry started, and they create this search engine working at Stanford. How did they get you involved in 2001?
Well, Larry and Sergey invented the algorithms, the lessons, if you will, the way our search works today, when they were very young and in graduate school. And they founded Google and eventually needed some additional management help, and there was a search, and ultimately I got connected to them through one of our board members, John Doerr. From my perspective, most of what you see at Google today was invented at Stanford by graduate students, and a lot of the culture, the way we operate, is really derived from that culture.
Your background, though, was as a technologist.
That's correct.
You've been head of technology for Sun Microsystems. You've been a CEO. Yep.
Yeah, and I see myself mostly as a technologist who happens to run a business.
What was the original mission for Google?
All the world's information, universally accessible and useful.
And how are we doing on that?
Well, we've just started. And I would tell you that when you're 23 years old and you state that's your mission, you've got a lot of years ahead of you. And Larry and Sergey still have a long way to go on that.
This is what I've always wanted to wonder. I'm told this is true, that in the beginning, what you were going to do was sell to people the search technology. We'll sell this to you, and then you can do search.
The first model was just, this is an amazing new invention, this ability to search information. And at the time, the web was not so complicated. It wasn't as obvious that search would be needed because it wasn't that big. You can sort of look and find things and you knew people. So Larry and Sergey went around to all of the then powerful internet companies, and every one of them turned him down.
Saying what?
We have a better solution, we don't know how to work with you, you're too young, that sort of thing.
Entrepreneurs have gone through this. There's not an entrepreneur alive who hasn't gone to somebody and say, good luck, not for me.
There's a rule in Silicon
Including
Valley.
bankers.
There's the rule in Silicon Valley that the great entrepreneurs break out early. And I think you see that. And I think part of the reason that occurs is because of the educational system in America with graduate students and young faculty is very, very productive. So you get people right out of college, you get them into a graduate program, and they invent something, and all the world's in front of them, and they go for it. It's one of the greatest aspects of America.
Well, what smart person decided that rather than selling the technology, we'll just sell advertising?
Well, the initial attempts didn't work because they heard no, no, and no. Meanwhile, the money's kind of running out, and they're getting kind of nervous. So they came up with a simple advertising model, which one of the engineers invented that worked pretty well. And the small team at the time managed to get a couple of deals. When I showed up, that product was fixed in price. And Google had invented a dynamic system that ultimately became our product called AdWords. And I remember walking to the very young program manager, whose name is Salar, who looked to me to be about 21 years old. And I just joined, and I said, promise me our revenues are not going to go down by a factor of 10 when your brilliant new product comes out. He said, it's going to go up by a factor of 10. And I said, no, and indeed he was right.
And advertising is now what, 90% of the revenue?
98%.
98%.
Yeah.
So advertising,
but who's counting?
Advertising has been very, very, very good to Google.
We are an advertising company. And you can think of Google as two parts of a company. You can think of it as a user phenomena, and our primary focus, by the way, is on end users and solving their needs. And you can also think of it as a business, in which case it's an advertising business.
All right. Since then, how many searches last year, 2008? Do you know?
I don't know, but it's in the many, many billions.
Many $1 billion. And it's growing exponentially each year, or is it plateaued?
Well, search in terms of users is growing quite nicely because the internet is growing. And one of the great stories, even as this bad economic situation that we have now, is that the internet continues to solve people's needs. People really do use it every day, no matter what their state. There was a survey recently that said that your broadband connection was the last thing you'd get rid of in all of your financial problems.
And today, Google does many things. I mean, searches is its primary thing, but you've created email, Google News.
We started off with search. And the early founding team, Larry and Sergey and the initial team, invented the advertising model, which has done so well for us. On April 1st of 2004, we introduced our first application, which was called Gmail. And at the time, people thought it was an April Fool's joke. And we sort of played with that, but it was part of our character. And today, we say our strategy is search, ads, and apps. And the application...
Search, ads, and apps.
And applications that make your life better. And we have the ability now, because we have so many people using Google, to really change the way they use computers in a way that's material. The term of art is now called cloud computing. And the idea is to let the computer take care of all the details. All you do is just use it. It's always there. Google or someone else keeps the information. We don't lose it. We don't break it. It doesn't get viruses, that sort of thing.
Applications. You have this thing at Google where you can take a day off of each week, or 20% of your time, say, out of 100%, 5 days, 1 day, and you can work on anything you want to. How much of that has led to interesting, productive, profitable applications?
We think the 20% time is really the only way we've been able to maintain our innovation as we've gotten larger. What normally happens with technology companies is the initial founding team gets older, you bring in traditional management, and although they becomes a better managed company, much of the creativity and the flair and the joie de vivre gets lost in the process. By establishing the principle that engineers could spend 20% of their time working on whatever they found interesting, we created a culture where there's this constant flow of innovation. Literally, every day, there's another fun surprise. Now, before we get too excited about the 20% time, these are engineers. They don't vary that far from their area of interest. But it gives them an opportunity.
They're not finding a cure for cancer, they're looking at...
By the way, if they did, we'd be very excited about it. But what they're really doing is they're saying, in my space, I see all of these new technologies, and there's a new problem that I see that I want to apply this stuff to. And that's how the innovation works.
You also bought YouTube. You have Google News. We're at a time now, and we're going to talk a lot about the economy in this conversation because of some of the roles you have. Acquisitions come up. People are excited these days, the last several months, about Twitter. Does Google want to buy Twitter?
I shouldn't talk about specific acquisitions.
Good.
We're unlikely to buy anything in the short term, partly because I think prices are still high. And it's unfortunate that I think we're in the middle of a cycle. Google is generating a lot of cash, and so we keep that cash in extremely secure banks, right? I should add, and we'll wait that out. From our perspective, I think the YouTube acquisition and the DoubleClick acquisition, which are the two large ones we did last year and the year before, have been phenomenally successful.
YouTube is defined by an interesting idea, which many people think has sort of been a breakthrough idea, which is it is user-generated. Most of the video comes from user. Now, there are other people now are forming all kinds of video operations in which the information comes from programs like mine and NBC and CBS and PBS and the rest of them. But YouTube has been fueled by user-generated. People did with their cameras. How much of a phenomenon is that going to be in the future of the internet?
We think it will be one of the most defining aspects of the internet, because if you think about it, everybody has phones, and every phone has a still camera, and every one of those phones is going to have a movie camera pretty soon. And indeed, if you think about it, a lot of the news that you see, you'll see some phone camera video of low quality. Well, 5 years from now, those will be very high quality videos as the technology gets better. And the joke is that the vast majority of photographs now taken are kept in people's phones because they can't get them out of them. Right?
Yes, that's true. So, they can take the picture, but they don't know what to do with it.
So we're working to solve all that problem. The important thing here is that the phenomenon of user-generated content, of which YouTube is an example, is, I think, the defining expression of humanity over the next 10 to 20 years. We had no idea that all these things were going on because there was no way to see them. And now if you have someone who's being taken advantage of or abused or put in an inappropropriate position or what have you, they can take a picture. They can record what the police are doing in a dictatorship and that kind of stuff. There's a lot of implications.
Speak to that.
Well, the most interesting thing to me is that transparency is how you keep societies honest. And we've now, because of the internet and because of the digital revolution, we've essentially given them the ability to see everything. So you can now take photographs, take videos of everything you see in your world, and people discover it. And there are whole communities of people who are interested in these kinds of aspects, and they serve as a form of check and balance on the powerful, the rich, the people who might exploit others. It doesn't necessarily mean for a different outcome, but it means that everybody can't hide. They have to actually tell the truth. And to me, that's a great step forward.
And how will it affect politics?
Well, there are many ways. Today, if you talk to politicians, a simple story is that in 2006, the House went Democratic, the Senate went Democratic because of a race in Virginia which involved an unfortunate video on YouTube of a Republican candidate losing to a Democratic candidate.
George Allen was running for the Senate as a Republican, running for re-election, and he was campaigning somebody in which he had a moment in which he reacted to somebody in the audience, and they all had it on cell phone.
And politicians have learned from that lesson. So there's an example where the government switched power, literally on the margin, because of somebody's video and the ability to
and
use
where
YouTube.
nations have been trying to hide things in terms of accountability that may be spreading in a certain region.
And on the Democratic side, there was another example was that there was a video of one of the congressional people involved in the Abscam scandal, which many people have forgotten. And yet the video brought back those memories and affected the outcome of a Democratic race. And it's an equal opportunity technology. The important point here is that politicians today are well aware of YouTube and its phenomena, and they're more careful. And being more careful is probably good, because if they are going off and saying things to small audiences and then going to another audience and saying something very different, I want to know that as a viewer. There are many things that you can imagine in the future. The one I like the most is the politician's BS detector, where basically Google is sitting there and the politician says something and you can type it in, or even maybe it listens to it and it says, well, that's true or false.
Yeah.
Then you can decide if you want to leave or cheer.
Well, it also has this ramifications too, is because people on the internet now who may have information, if they know something is going on and an investigation by a journalistic organization, it can hold them accountable too, because somebody may have information that some facts used in the journalist report were not true because they have better information or they have information that contradicts.
What happens as a result is that it's very difficult now to use completely false statements to inflame the public. You can take the facts and you can twist them in the way that you see fit, but your facts have to be right. And that's probably a big improvement in governance.
It also is how then Senator Obama had a difficult moment during the Pennsylvania primary when he went out to San Francisco to raise some money. Somebody was in there with a phone and recorded something. So, mobile devices will play what role in the future sort of evolution of technology?
They're probably the most important of all. Today, everyone here in the audience has a mobile phone. It's the last thing you would leave anywhere. That phone has a GPS, knows where it is. The powerful mobile phones have powerful browsers. They have cameras, as we discussed before. You can do a lot with them. Fast forward a few years from now, with the content and the capability of that, with a new generation of applications, we expect eventually that the majority of uses of the internet will be on mobile phones. Mobile phone usage is growing faster than personal computers. There are many more of them, on the order of 4 billion in the world. In our lifetime, the majority of people, at least 5 billion, maybe 5.5 billion, will have mobile phones.
The exponential growth in countries like China and India and emerging markets, as they're called, even though they pretty much emerged rather well, is extraordinary.
In our lifetimes,
millions per month.
In our lifetimes, we're going from almost no one being able to communicate to almost everyone being able to communicate. We're also going from almost no one having any kind of information and access to libraries to virtually everyone having access to every piece of information in the world. That is an enormous accomplishment for humanity.
It brings me to some of the issues that might be relevant here. Number one, in terms of copyright and all of that, you guys would like to have every author of every book ever published make it available through Google. Fair enough?
That's right. And furthermore, we want them compensated. And we've entered into an agreement that we hope will be approved by a court of book publishers and authors, where essentially rights holders will register and they will get essentially a commission and a payment for the use of their work if it's printed on an electronic basis. We hope that in this model, people will be comfortable that if people find the book, they'll buy it online, either in text form, or they'll go to Amazon or somebody like that and purchase the book, in which case the author will also be happy.
Or they'll put it on their Kindle or
what have you.
Reader or something.
It's worth noting, by the way, that if you imagine the power of these mobile devices over a 5 or 10 year period, they should be possible to do almost everything that we do today with other means. It should be possible to read books very well on those devices, make it as fast as reading a magazine. It should be possible to watch television and watch your show routinely on these devices at very high quality. The technology is just getting there. And when that occurs, it's a different experience because it's a personal experience. When I turn on the television, it shows the same shows that I saw yesterday, and I watch them, and it doesn't know that I watched them yesterday. What a foolish television. Why is it not smarter?
So what are you going to do about that?
Well, in our case, we're building the platform that will allow the content people to do more targeted content. So you can imagine the mobile device will say, well, Eric, you watched this episode of this television show, we'll offer you this other one. Oh, didn't you forget that you already watched that episode of Charlie Rose? You should watch this other one because it's related to the one you liked. This personal viewing experience is a fundamental thing that the internet can do and that companies like Google can do that you cannot do with traditional mechanisms.
But that's also the key to the advertising too, isn't it?
Oh, of course.
In other words, that's why you guys got so rich, is that when people, whatever you were searching for, gave a link to what you're interested in, and you could therefore pinpoint products that might appeal to you.
That's right.
How much of it is text rather than video?
Well, today it's the vast majority of it is text.
90%?
95%. Those text ads that you see near search results are very, very lucrative. It's a great business to be in.
Yes.
And that's probably, you probably say that's an understatement.
Yes, I do.
But the same model works for other things. So we're busy building, for example, in the display ads, which are the picture and so forth. We're building much more sophisticated and powerful ads that are immersive. It's all about narrative. When I look at your show and I look at what you do, I see a narrative that is evolved.
Exactly. I'm conscious of that every moment.
Really?
A story.
It's always about a story. And that's been true for 5,000 years. It's not a new concept. And
it's a little bit like People magazine. Henry Luce once was being criticized because there was the People section of Time magazine was the most popular section. That's what they went to, read more. So then they created People magazine. But someone at the time said, this is frivolous information about people. And what is it that people are so, why are people so curious about other people? And Henry Louis famously said, have you read the Bible? It's all about stories about people. But go ahead, I interrupted.
I think the important point here is that we can get a personal experience that really does have a narrative and has an ad associated with it. Right. And that ad itself can have a narrative. Right. It can have a contest, it can have user involvement. And we believe that a highly personal ad has value to the user. I mean, it makes no sense. If you show me an advertisement at home, in a home that doesn't have a need for baby products, diapers, and so forth, why are you wasting your money? You should show me an ad that's relevant to my demographic. We can do that now with these devices, and we can do it to the person.
Sir, Martin Sorrell is a man you know, head of WPP, sort of created him through acquisitions, made it, I think, the second largest maybe advertising company in the world. He has a term for you guys called, I think it's a combination of friend or enemy, frenemy, which he says, are these guys our friends or are they our enemy?
Well, when I talk to Martin, he's our friend. And we actually have a very close partnership with WPP, which has worked really well. And the advertising industry and the agencies are learning how to work with these new models. There's a great need for creativity because as part of advertising is about stories, advertising about images, the narrative, and the tools are coming. So over the next few years, you'll see very sophisticated visual advertisements. Think of them as YouTube videos in one form or another that are immersive, that get you excited about buying the product. And maybe at the end, you'll be so compelled you will buy the product, and we can sell those products and make a lot of money.
Here is the question that everybody asks in technology today, not anybody at Google. But if you do what I do, and if you do what people who have content do, and if you do what YouTube does, how do you monetize it? I mean, there's a huge problem, not a problem, challenge. As Rahm Emanuel says, we see every crisis as an opportunity. There's a challenge to find ways to monetize it. You produce content. If you make it free, you don't generate a lot of revenue. So what's the answer to monetization? Because it affects YouTube, one of your companies.
On user-generated content, a lot of it is very hard to monetize. Right. Very hard to show an ad next to some of the stuff, and many advertisers wouldn't want to be near that stuff.
Yeah, right. That's a problem, isn't it? That's a problem. They don't want to be there.
So there's a total market of monetizable thing. Here's a model for you. For things which are going to be viewed by 2 billion people, you're going to use advertisements. And you'll use, in the case of YouTube, you'll use videos around the side, you'll use ads at the bottom, you'll do 15-second pre-roll or post-roll, and all of those experiments are being tried at YouTube. I would say YouTube's monetization of that is halfway. We're not where we need to be, but we're much farther along than we were last year.
Okay, take social networks like Facebook and MySpace. They have the same problem.
Absolutely.
Argument is made that the people who are on Facebook are interested in what their friends are doing. They're not interested in ads because they're not searching for products
but that denies the fundamental progress of innovation. There absolutely will be solutions for that. We just haven't invented them yet.
Yes.
We're still waiting for the 20% timers to come up with these insights. But it's obvious. Right?
You've got some Google boys and girls out there working on this
you can't sort of tell them. It has to occur naturally through the bottoms-up process. So we're waiting. But we know it'll come because the amount of time being spent on that is so significant that we know we can use that time for some form of entertainment, advertising, some kind of immersive experience. Another way to think about content, I said 2 billion. If your audience is 2 billion, you'll use advertising. But if
mine's a little less than that.
Well, in a smaller audience, say, some number, 20 million kind of an audience, 2 million audience, you could imagine that you'll have micropayments, not advertising, where you'll pay a 1 cent, 3 cent, 5 cent for a view. And those tools and techniques are being developed now in the industry, and I think are likely to be successful. And then for highly, highly specialized, that is knowledge workers who are highly paid and they have to have this very special report, they'll pay big bucks and they'll use the traditional subscription mechanism.
Before we talk about 5 years from now and then 25 years from now, let me just raise a couple of points. One, Google Earth. How is it being used, and are people that we don't like using it?
Well, I'm sure that there are people we don't like using it. Yeah. The general answer about information...
Because remember there was a famous incident of Dick Cheney sort of wanted it wiped off because of the vice presidential residence. Isn't that right? Mm-hmm. Did you guys at Google do something?
Well, in fact, our supplier did it, but in any case, we have pictures back of where the resonance is.
You couldn't see what'd you get, a little blank space, or?
It was a little covered up. The problem I have with these arguments is that everyone knows where the vice president's residence is.
Yeah.
Okay, so what are we?
And if you don't know, you can find out.
It's on the maps.
Yes.
When you buy them in Washington.
No, that's right.
Vice President's residence, called the Naval Observatory.
You're right.
Look it up.
Okay.
What are we, like, where is the CIA? There's the address in the phone book.
It's in Langley. Yes.
Langley.
Right.
It's in the movies. There's a nice picture of driving into it. So the real question is, what information is broadly available to evil people? And the answer, unfortunately, is that virtually all of the information, any information we have has already been already available to the evil people as best we can tell. And we're obviously not trying to encourage that. But the fact of the matter is that physical maps are available to evil people and so forth and so on. So we try very hard not to show stuff that's not generally available.
Okay,
anyway.
but speaking of stuff that's generally available, okay, go ahead.
Just on the maps, I do want to emphasize that we've seen an explosion in the use of Google Maps and Google Earth for education. The Earth is a special place. It is our home, and it's why we're all here. And the ability to see what's really going on the Earth, both the good stuff and the bad stuff, at the level that you can, is phenomenal. Not only do we have Google Earth, you can see changes from climate change is the obvious one. People are finding things like meteorite impact craters and things like that. Last year we introduced something called Google Sky, which will show from the point you are on Google Earth what the sky looks like. It's a tremendous teaching tool. A few weeks ago we announced Google Ocean, and you can actually start from any of the coasts and go right under the water and see what the
topography is, or
it's unbelievable. And you need Google Earth version 5 beta.
Wait, but can you see the fish?
Yes, we have fake fish. We've drawn them in. And in fact, you can find shipwrecks and so forth. And we got information, this is an example where we got bathymetric information from the US Navy. They were happy to give it to help people understand the role of the
Is there a lot of
oceans.
cooperation between Google and the media? I mean, not the media, and the military.
There is.
How are they using you, or vice versa?
For stuff they give us stuff that's publicly available.
Right.
We're careful not to do anything beyond that. But I think many people have had all of these databases of generally interesting information that we can now make available through things like Google Earth.
I mean, just to back for a moment with respect to cell phones, I mean, that's Osama bin Laden actually caught up to the idea that they were tracing some stuff because of his cell phone was on. And then they announced it, and the administration at that time got very upset because they said, by announcing it in the newspaper, you showed that they were doing that, and so all of a sudden it went dark and you couldn't trace him. In addition to that, a number of the people to read the stories of how they captured some of these Al-Qaeda operatives, it was because of cell phones. Even though they were smart enough and knew enough and had enough information, only to turn them on for a few seconds, they were able to trace them down. Now, I want to go to GP.
I should say that, remember that the technology is neutral. The
right.
technology can be used for good or evil.
And even atheistic, or
yes,
it's
of
not.
course. And the important thing is that this new generation...
There's no theology is what I mean.
It does not have a theology. So this new technology really can be used for good or evil. And in a situation where a terrorist or so forth were using some of this new technology, there are obvious things that the smartest people in the world working on the good side could do to find them, follow it, and so forth. So I would not give up on your finding the cell phone sites. There are many other things that we could do to find them.
Now, speak to GPS in terms of what is going on, because, and what you guys at Google are thinking about, because there is this idea that you want us to know where everybody is all the time. So you can, not you, but you know what I mean.
The next generation, I'm not sure about my generation, but the next generation is infinitely more social online.
Right.
And there are
and infinitely less private.
Yes, as evidenced by their Facebook pictures.
Right.
And and by the way, those pictures will be around when they're running for president 30 years from now.
And we haven't quite settled who owns them either, have we? Even though Facebook...
it won't matter who owns them. Trust me, when they get out, it's going to be a problem when they're running for office.
Right. And not to speak of your emails.
That's right. Yeah. And the fact of the matter is that we've given up something in terms of privacy in return for these other things. And I think that is a societal change that we have to admit is occurring, at least among younger generations. The utility.
Any problem about this? Could it go too far?
Of course it can go too far. And the trick is that people should have control over what they choose to, people should have control over what information they publish. As long as the answer is that I chose to make a mess of myself with this picture, then it's fine. The issue is when somebody else does it.
It stuns me what people will do for 15 minutes of fame.
Well, but that's their choice, and they have to live with the consequences of it. But the fact of the matter is that it's now possible, for example, we have a product called Google Latitude, which runs on any of your mobile browsers using GPS, which will essentially tell everyone you wish where you are. And you can decide the level of accuracy and also how broadly you publish it. So you can say it only to 3 people, and you can tell them accurately. You can also say only to these 3 people, and you can tell them, oh, I'm in the state of New Jersey, or whatever.
Yeah, I got you.
And that notion of control is fundamental to the evolution of these privacy-based solutions.
Tease me about what's on the edge, what's exciting about where we're going in terms of what Google and other technology companies will be able to do for us or enable us.
Well, Google is first and foremost a search engine, and we like to think of the person as the search.
Right.
So when somebody types something in today, they're really typing in the context of their history, their background, what they know, their belief systems, and so forth. And if they give us permission, we can use some of that to give them more accurate information. So now let's imagine, for purposes of argument, a situation where you're walking down the street and it's with your mobile device and your GPS. So why can't my phone generate the searches that I should have been asking? It knows what I care about. I'm a fan of history. When I walk down the streets of New York, why doesn't it tell me the history of every building? So that I don't have to bother to type, I can just see it.
Yeah.
Imagine the situation where the person, the GPS, the phone, and this constant searching creates a narrative stream that's highly personal and highly entertaining. Entertain me.
So what can you imagine a circumstance in which I would somehow be able to communicate the idea that I was going to be talking to Eric Schmidt, and so they would provide me with lots of interesting questions?
Well, yes, and in fact, we can almost do that
like,
today.
where were you?
We can do that almost now with your calendar.
Yeah.
Because we know who you're meeting, and if your calendar is inside of Google, it should eventually be possible for us to generate the questions for each of your meetings.
Should be and will be when?
Should be. You know, it's engineers are working on lots of things.
So Gmail. Suppose I use Gmail. You guys can see all of my Gmail.
But we don't by practice.
Well, yeah, but you know what the argument is about that?
We have rules, Charlie.
Suppose you didn't like me.
Even if we don't like you, we won't violate our rules.
Yeah. So what? So you're saying trust us? Trust us?
Yes.
That's it. We're not gonna sneak a look.
We do not sneak a look.
So when Barack Obama was running for president, and he had a Gmail account, I don't know whether they did or not, nobody was saying.
To our knowledge, no one did it, and if they had, they would have been fired.
Immediately.
And it's also possible that they would have been guilty of federal laws had they broken into that account using a false password. The laws are very strict about this.
So if somebody gets into an account without using the password, they may be guilty of a crime.
Yeah, they're likely to be guilty.
Okay. Before we leave the notion of the time today, contemporary time, the digital divide. Where are we and where should we be and why aren't we there now?
The good news is that we work in a technology where prices are improving. It's a constant price reduction business. I have no idea, by the way, how these hardware companies make any money at all because prices are so low now. But the corollary benefit is the explosion in digital devices for people who could never have imagined having access to these things 10 or 20 years ago. The obvious example being in the gaming industry, where the game devices are as powerful as the personal computers today. The real story is going to be on the mobile phones, to come back to that, because everyone gets a mobile phone. And even in the third world, and that's the worst example of the digital divide, you can build networks where people use SMS, which are these short messages, the 160-character messages, to actually do searches and queries, and we do that in those markets. And if you're a farmer who's depending on the price, the weather forecast, that query may determine whether you go bankrupt or not with your farm.
Okay, but where is that though? I mean, do they have access to that?
It is absolutely
if they have a mobile phone, and more people have mobile phones, so therefore more farmers know whether it's going to rain.
There are roughly 1 billion more mobile phones coming online in the next 3 to 3.5 years. That extra billion voices are voices we have never heard. in languages we don't speak. We have no idea what they're going to tell us, but they're going to be heard, and I think it's great.
Okay, but that raises the interesting question about what language will be used. I mean, does it depend? I mean, is English the standard for? Is China going to be Chinese going to be the standard in 2050?
Well, English appears to be the global language, certainly of
today.
Commerce and intellectual. On the internet, Chinese is growing more quickly as a language than Chinese and Mandarin specifically over English.
And why is that? Just because there are a
just
lot of
because
Chinese?
the number, there are many Chinese with lots more to go.
And increasingly, they are the middle class who has access to technology.
There are on the order of 250 million users in China of the internet, which is more than the number of users that we have in the United States today, and that's an important milestone. And they have many, many hundreds of millions to go. There are about 500 million mobile phone users in China, right? With again many more Chinese people to come.
And the rate of growth is extraordinary.
Yes.
In this audience of people who are involved in the process in education and learning, how is technology doing all it can to help us? Is technology on the cutting edge? Is technology delivering its promise?
Let me give you the simple
case.
And
that's what we want?
Let me give you the simple case and I think the challenging case. The simple case is that all of these new technologies allow you to organize your classroom around community learning. Yeah. So and children can do this today. Build a small website. We have a product called Sites that does this, there are others, where you basically build a knowledge domain and everybody can contribute. You have a document, everyone can collectively edit it and so forth, and you figure out who did all the work. A lot of learning today and watching teachers teach is they try to do it in groups. We don't really see it as individuals anymore, and that starts literally in first grade. So that's likely, the majority of use today is really community-based, using images, searches, and so forth, all of which we're happy to do at Google. To me, the real question is, how does the ability to have all the world's information in front of you all the time change education? When I was 13, and I grew up in Virginia, I was required to memorize the 52 cities that were the capital cities of each county of the state of Virginia, which I mastered after a lot of work. Today, of course, there's a nice table in Google that tells me all that. I don't know why I'd have to memorize all that.
I could give you a test on this.
So why did I have to memorize all that? Because instead of what they should have done is they should have taught me how to search for it.
Exactly.
So I have friends. I have a friend who's a venture capitalist, Bill Joy, who described how he does venture capital. Is he uses Google to search for all the new ideas. He reads the papers, so he figures out what the search query is. He reads the paper, and then he calls the people to say what's new, what's innovative.
No, wait, this is important to me. He looks at the papers, then he goes online and looks at newspapers, or he reads them.
He starts off with a search.
Oh.
I'm interested in hydrodynamics, and he learns by repetitive searching till he finds the papers that are authoritative. He looks for who the authors are, and he calls the authors. And these are people no one ever calls. So they return his call.
Yeah.
Right? And that's how he learns. So rather than having a textbook, he starts with a search on an idea. The combination of Wikipedia, which is a remarkable achievement for humanity, just phenomenal, and search engines like Google mean that you can literally get it all if you're willing to be motivated. So my idea about school would be that you would sit there with however many students you have, and you'd say, students, I'm going to give you a set of search terms to get started with, and we're going to see which of you learn the most. And what would happen, of course, is about a third, the ones in the back row that are asleep, are going to wait for the other two-thirds. And out of the other two-thirds, some of them will do it great, some of them do it poorly, and then you'd have a conversation among all of them. It's a complete inversion of the textbook model. And of course, you could supplement it with a textbook for the people who are uncomfortable or not creative in that regard.
What you said is you could. Are these kinds of things being translated to the people on the front line of education, the teachers and the principals and the schools?
I've met educators who are doing this. I was giving you the extreme example.
Right.
The most important accomplishment I've seen in education has been the development of these community sites around topic areas. So some of the best teachers in physics and chemistry and so forth get together and they put together lessons, ostensibly as an online lesson plan, but it's really to get a compendium of information. And we have a lot of evidence that committed people, professionals like people here in the audience, who work collaboratively across all the United States, produce an enormously valuable product. And that product can serve as the basis for the next revision of textbooks, the next revision of certification, and I think it's wonderful.
Let's look 5 years from now. I mean, all the things we've been talking about today are mostly here today. Where is it all going? What's exciting about where we will be?
Let's do a little math.
Okay.
5 years from now, Moore's Law, doubling every 18 months, means a factor of 10 in everything you have today.
You need to explain that a little bit more. I mean,
Okay.
Gordon Moore created this law, which said...
There's a law called Moore's Law, which is true today, that
which has been true since he originated the idea.
In 1970.
We thought a new calculation might step forward, but it didn't.
Not today.
Right.
It has to do with the physics of transistors and semiconductors. And basically, Moore's Law says that you can double the density or the number of things that are on a computer chip every 18 months. So a rough rule means that the computer either gets twice as fast or half the price over an 18-month period. Usually the vendors would prefer that it get twice as fast and not fall half in price because of the revenue implications of that. But that's why these phones that you have more computer power than the entire NASA space program used in launching us to the moon. All of the computers that they had. It's a phenomenal achievement, and it's not slowing down. All of the evidence about Moore's Law says that it will go on for another 10 to 15 years. Eventually, we run into problems with photolithography and literally the speed of light, but we're not quite there yet. So for the next 10 or 15 years, you'll see this kind of compound benefit. So I like to think of it this way. If you figure that out, that means that in 5 years, it'll be 10 times cheaper or faster. In 10 years, by the way, that's 100 times cheaper or faster. And in 15 years, it's 1,000 times cheaper and faster. So unless something changes in 15 years, I have a grandson, he'll be 18 in 15 years. Mm-hmm. He will have all of the world's information, every video, every movie, and so forth, on a single hard drive. If he started watching it, he cannot finish watching it in 85 years. He'll always be frustrated.
It's amazing. What else is happening in 5 years now? I mean, this has to do with the field that you're really in, which is all the world's information.
There are many things that we can do with the corpus of information that's being gathered. We were talking about latitude and privacy and so forth, but there are many positive things that we can do. The most interesting one that we've recently done is called flu trends. We looked at disaggregated... Flu
trends in terms of worldwide flu,
and there's a lot of evidence. There's a lot of evidence concerned about a pandemic that might occur, similar to the 1918 bird flu epidemic that killed
50 million.
A proportionally huge number if it were today. And because people, when they have a problem, search for something, we can detect uncommon searches as a blip, and we can note that. In our case, we built a system which took anonymized searches, so you couldn't figure out exactly who it was, and that's important. And we could get 6 months ahead of the other reporting mechanisms, and we could identify the outbreak. Many people believe that this device can save 10, 20, 30,000 lives every year, just because the healthcare providers can get earlier and contain the outbreak. It's an example of collective intelligence, of which there are many, many more.
Well, I mean, just think about this, mapping the human genome. You know, that they sort of got mostly there by, I think it was 2000, right around 2000, 2001 it may have been, or 19. Clinton had it at the White House, and he left in 2000, so it may have been 1999, but right around there. But they're just beginning to have it pay off. I mean, because they've been mapping it, but that was done because technology enabled them to compress the amount of time to do it. And now they're doing remarkable stuff in terms of technology, and companies that, can personalize it. Right. So rather than paying, that's a place where it's been compressed, so you can pay $1,000 soon and know everything you may want to know and may not want to know. But if you want to know it, it will inform you about those diseases that you have a genetic predisposition to. And maybe there are things that you can do, even though you have a predisposition to, that will either make your life longer or not. Other people say, I worry about that because in the hands of insurance companies, it might not be so fine.
But everyone's worried about everything. Why don't we get optimistic for a change?
Right.
Let's try to figure out a way, right? Why don't we try to figure out a way to use this to solve some problem? Let me give you an example.
Right.
The Wikipedia model has been so successful. Why don't we have all the smartest doctors organize a corpus, a public corpus of medical information that combines everything everybody knows about medical practice in one place? A place where you can, again, this would have to be a public database, where you keep pouring more experiential data, and then you could build computer systems.
So you have all your cases, everything you ever knew.
Again, anonymized, so it's appropriately legal and all of that, and get it in one place so that people can begin to mine the data. They can actually begin to figure out what the disease trends are. What are the real health trends? And this is not a knock on the existing providers who do it. They just don't have the scale. We are strong when we have thousands of people working in parallel to solve a really important problem. And I would tell you, by the way, that if you look at the problems that the society has hit over the last 1,000 years, start with the plague, right? All of the things that we really hit us that nearly destroyed society, we overcame them through technology and innovation. People figured out new ways, whether it was in medicine or governance, to overcome them. So let's be positive about it. We can work those issues. There's always a way to handle the objections if it's important.
Okay, well, do we need anything in terms of presidential initiative, presidential leadership, a czar, or anything in order that we get on with it?
Well, we needed the stimulus package because the stimulus package had, among other things, $20 billion of science funding.
Right.
Science and education funding, and essentially to move the ball forward. One of the things about economics is everyone assumes that economics are static. Real wealth is created by businesses, not by financial engineering, and by businesses that build new products that solve new problems. And American jobs, and this is primarily in American, obviously the American stimulus package, need to be high paying for a reason. We're losing out to low-cost manufacturing economies, but we have the best scientists, the best innovators, the best educational system, and it should pay off. And the way it pays off is innovation, new products that pay well.
The president. How is all this changing us? I mean, you know, I moderated a seminar or a panel at the World Science Summit last year. The topic was what it means to be human. You know, some say, you know, that the human genome has made us understand more what it means to be human. And it's also made us understand that in terms of so many things that people might have cited as differences, that our genetic code was essentially the same. But we're always in quest of what it is that means to be human. How is all this helping us understand that?
It's certainly made me understand why life is so precious. That computers and the things that we do not replicate the feelings, the emotions, the excitement, the images, you know, the smell of bread on the Paris morning sort of thing. All of those things are uniquely human and uniquely special. The technology has made us closer together. It has also made us more stressed. If you look at the history of technology over a couple hundred years, it's all about time compression and making the globe smaller. It's had positive effects, all the ones that we know. We're much less likely to have the kind of terrible misunderstandings that led to World War I, for example. Think about it in the Cuban Missile Crisis. There was literally a red phone that they actually installed over miscommunication over a nuclear weapon, and there was one submarine in the Cuban Missile Crisis that they couldn't find and they were worried was about to launch a nuclear weapon. Think about the damage that would have done to humanity. Today, that's not going to happen because of, among other things, cell phones. So we benefit from this interconnectedness. We have to learn as a society what it means to be interconnected all the time. It means, for example, that not everything is as important as everything else. Since I have access to every crisis in the world because it's always blaring at me on cable television, that doesn't mean I have to worry about every one of them. This is also known as knowing where the off button is.
You know where the off button is.
You have to.
Do you have any advice for us in parenting?
Children are different from adults in a lot of ways, and the thing I worry about today about children, and we all know how much quicker more quickly they grow up, is that as young minds...
And how quick they adjust to technology.
I worry that the level of interrupt, right, this sort of overwhelming rapidity of information, and especially of stressful information, is in fact affecting cognition. It is in fact affecting deeper thinking. I still believe that sitting down and reading a book is the best way to really learn something. And I worry that we're losing that. And I think that with an educator audience, it's important that we start with reading. If you look at all of the IQ testing and all of the tracking testing, it's early reading with young parents, literally, with small children, that really make the difference.
Okay, but I mean, I would add to that also the ability to write. Has technology made us read less but write more because of emails and all that kind of stuff?
Remember, there's quality versus quantity.
Yeah.
The good news is that all the evidence is that the symbolic reasoning that comes from playing computer games, the kind of navigational queries, the example I used where go search for something, really does develop the
cognitive ability.
Literally the ability to think in more abstract terms. And that's going to be more important as the world gets more complicated. Think about the challenges that someone being born today will face. Literally, their birth date is this calendar year. Think about the kind of issues they'll face in a world which is 1,000 times faster, 1,000 times more interconnected when they're 15.
All right,
20 years,
that makes me leap to this thing. I'm fascinated by what the world will look like in 2025. It's one quarter of this century that we're in now. If you go to the CIA website, they do two things. One, they spy on people and they collect data, sometimes in the same time. But that's what they do. That's the business area. And sometimes they get it right, and sometimes they get it wrong. But on their website, you can get the whole series, and they'll talk about it on television interviews with people like me in terms of looking forward. And they say a lot of interesting things. I mean, they say, for example, it is more likely in the next 25 years that in the next 16 years we'll have some kind of nuclear exchange. It is more likely that there will be a water shortage, a water scarcity that will cause territorial battles. It is more likely that there will be a food scarcity. I mean, these are all things that we're not even talking about in the budget.
That's because the budget was organized around the next 2 years,
yes, exactly.
not the next 20 years.
Right.
If you look at the threats to humanity, the two significant threats.
I didn't even mention nuclear proliferation.
What are the things that could kill 1 million people, 10 million people, 100 million people? Well, the nuclear issues, some form of nuclear conflict, a nuclear accident is one. And the other one is climate change. And climate change, of course, is many things, including rising sea levels. But the shift in where rain falls and the associated watersheds, the loss of the Himalayan glacier and so forth, all affect a number of people that is staggering. As a person involved in information, what can we do to help? We can get this message out. We can get the human society to understand how serious the threat. When you fly over those glaciers, remember someone drinks that water. And if they don't get it, they will riot, or they will die, or there will be a war. And similarly for the predecessors who worked so hard for nuclear proliferation. And I would think twice when I hear somebody, in this testosterone range saying, I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that. Let's have some nuance here. It's possible to really destroy the great things that we've built here on Earth relatively quickly in these two areas. The good news is that's the bad news. The good news is there are so many other areas where things will be so much better. In medicine, the deployments that they've made of artificial limbs and eventually naturally grown through stem cells and others, replacement parts will allow a much better life, or at least certainly a longer life compared to what we have today. In terms of knowledge, I said before, you'll have every piece of information in front of you, and by the way, it'll be in every language, because in that time period, we'll have automatic translation. It'll be possible for you to text to your friend and not be able to speak to them in person, because we'll be able to automatically translate the text from your language to their language. We'll be able to take all of your shows and automatically translate them. Plus, they'll all be searchable, so we can do it in historical time as well. Google recently brought out both a history search and also in Google Earth a view of history, so you can go back to your favorite places and watch the pictures of how they evolved. It's amazing what we can do with all of this new information.
So here's the question. Many people write books now in which they talk about, with the economic crisis, the changing world order, a flat world, that America will not have the same place it did in the 20th century. You got a degree in Princeton, went out to Berkeley and got a PhD in computer sciences, I think, mathematics or something. You know, that we are not necessarily going to lead the revolution that will deliver these things. Is that of concern to you, or do you accept the premise?
If you're a person who believes that America is the only country and America is always right, I have news for you. It's not going to be true in the future, because the Chinese and the Indians and the sum of the Europeans will have their own stake on what's right and what they think the future is. We're moving
So
from
we're looking to a shared world.
we're moving into a world where you're going to actually talk to them. And in the case of in a case of a sole superpower model, it's easy to say American values, we're right, you're wrong, and take over people's culture. That's not going to be possible. Where America will be strongest, and where I think we should be, we will be, and it matters the most, will be in innovation.
How do you know that?
I know it because I talk to the people who are running our universities. I talk to these students. We hire the best students. They are going to go off and do these amazing things that you and I are talking about.
Why do you assume that the best students are going to be American? Why aren't they? Or why do you assume that the Chinese or the Indians or Russians or wherever they come from are necessarily want to come here?
Because they choose to come here right now.
But
they're
we
voting
just
with their
accept
feet.
it.
They're voting with their feet.
But no, wait. Because of immigration policies and other things, they're all not being allowed to stay here.
Well, that's a brilliant strategy. Take the best people, hire them in American universities, and kick them out of our country.
It happens.
It's shocking.
It happens.
I know. We're fighting against that.
But it's an issue in the Congress now, but it's a priority. But my point is that, I mean, we can't assume necessarily, or can we, that we have some lock on the smartest people.
It turns out it's harder to replicate the American educational system.
I'm asking. That's where I'm going.
The innovation, the model that we have about faculty, graduate students, innovation, all the things that we've talked about, is many countries are trying. It takes 50 years to replicate that, and maybe a different culture. So we America, remain by far the place of choice for education, in particular higher education.
So you're optimistic about
Absolutely.
American.
And we should give some credit, not just to the educators and the students, but also the government, who has a historic role. Maybe a third of the funding for American universities comes from one form or another of federal and state grants. We also have a history of state colleges, state universities, so forth and so on, which is very, very powerful.
As I said earlier in introducing you, that there is your own economic advisor, whatever it is down there, council, a bunch of businessmen and other people, women in finance who are advising the president, right? What is it you do? What's your advice?
This president is, and I'm a public supporter of President Obama, as you know, is very, very good at listening. He organizes groups. He sort of gets everybody to talk. He synthesizes very, very quickly. So I and others, right, have campaigned hard for quick action to deal with the economic crisis, with a bias in favor of renewable energy, technology innovation, investing in the infrastructure of America, which has largely been unfocused, and of course in education. I'm pleased to say that
healthcare too.
Healthcare, of course. I'm pleased to say that the stimulus package had about 2/3 of the money in the stimulus package went for those kinds of areas, along with the states and local governments, which were in terrible situation, and 1/3 to tax cuts, which is about the right balance. So we're now running that experiment, but that's in place, and we need confidence quickly. I would tell you that the business situation in America right now is really quite dire. You see increasing bad news, even today, bad news. There's no end in sight.
Unemployment's up.
We're not at the bottom here, and the quicker we can get through this, the quicker we can get to the other side. I do believe that the recovery, when it occurs, will be led by the kind of businesses that we're highlighting now, the ones that solve a new problem. I, for example, believe that green energy, sort of rebuilding the energy infrastructure of America, is a great project. It's a great project for this president, who can then use that to reduce our dependence upon foreign oil, increase American jobs, right? And build a whole set of export-oriented industries. And oh, by the way, help materially solve the climate change issue, which is very serious.
So we'll come through this.
Oh, absolutely. One of the things is if you have a choice between being in America and being in the other countries in a global slowdown, you'd much rather be here. Although it's more painful, you'll get out faster.
I have a question. It is this notion of, I was just thinking about this, I mean, are people in technology different?
Yes.
They are. Well, what is it?
Technologists as a group tend to be more analytical, more data-driven, more personally liberal, more willing to tolerate the differences among people, more global in their focus. And I think that's across all political parties. People in technology believe that you can create whole new businesses. In my dealings with other businesses, they often seem to be locked in a paradigm that was given to them by their grandfather. You know, this is the economic structure, this is the industrial structure, this is how it's always been done. Technology as a group believe that you can literally change the world from technology.
It's a pleasure to have you here in New York.
Thank you.
You very much.
Thank you very much, Sarah.
Eric Schmidt, the CEO of Google.
Thank you.
Thanks. For those of you at home, thank you for joining us this evening. This is our conversation with Eric Schmidt. Thank you very much, and good night.